I'm hungry. The whisper came from a little girl curled on the cold granite steps of a skyscraper, her dress too fine for her trembling hands and tear-streaked face. Commuters rushed by blind to her. The security guard didn't even glance down. But one man stopped a tired single dad in a faded blue uniform, carrying only a brown paper bag and his son's broken toy. Without hesitation, he tore his sandwich in half and held it out. What he didn't know, what no one could have guessed, was that the girl was the daughter of one of the most powerful women in the city, and that woman was standing right behind him. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you are watching from so I can see how far this story has gone. The city was waking fast, neon fading into the pale gray of dawn as glass towers caught the first edge of light. Ethan Cole walked with his head-down boots scuffing the sidewalk. His uniform was wrinkled, the company logo half-faded from too many washes. He carried a lunch bag in one hand, a scuffed dinosaur toy in the other. The toy belonged to Liam, his 7-year-old boy who had begged him not to throw it away. Ethan's nights were short. Between late janitorial shifts and Liam's asthmatic coughs, sleep rarely lasted more than 3 hours. His mornings started with instant coffee gone cold before the mug was half empty. Still, he pushed forward. One job led to another, and at least he could keep a roof above their heads. That had to be enough. But that morning, as he neared the towering steel and glass building where he worked, something stopped him. On the broad stone steps sat a girl small, maybe 6 years old, in a neat white dress with ribbons that looked like they cost more than his rent. Her knees were pulled up to her chest. Her face was streaked with tears, and she stared down at the pavement like she wanted to vanish into it. No one slowed. A businessman in a navy suit brushed past, muttering into his phone. A pair of women in heels glanced briefly, then turned away. Even the building's security guard shifted uncomfortably, then looked elsewhere. Ethan paused, shifting his weight, knowing he was already cutting it close to being late. One more write-up, and his supervisor would toss him out without hesitation. But there was something in the girl's eyes when she finally looked up, a raw, quiet panic that tore at him. He walked over slowly, crouching down to her level. His voice softened the way he always spoke when Liam was scared. "Hey, kiddo, you all right?" The girl shook her head quickly, curls bouncing against her cheeks. Then, barely audible, she whispered, "I'm hungry." Ethan blinked. That was it. Just 2 words, fragile and small, and they cut deeper than any reprimand his boss could throw at him. He looked at the bag in his hand. Inside was one sandwich, squashed from being shoved into the bag, nothing fancy. Just turkey cheese and bread he'd bought with clipped coupons. It was meant to last him through the day, the only meal he'd likely get until late that night, when Liam would insist he take the bigger half of whatever dinner they shared. But looking at the girl, Ethan knew the choice wasn't really a choice. He sat down beside her on the steps, ignoring the odd looks from passers-by. Slowly, he pulled out the sandwich, unwrapped the wax paper, and tore it in half with his calloused hands. He held out the larger piece. "It's not much," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "but it's fresh. And right now I think you need it more than me." For a moment, the girl just stared wide-eyed and wary, as though she'd never seen a stranger do something without expecting anything in return. Then, with trembling fingers, she took it. She bit down quickly, almost desperately, as if afraid it would vanish. Ethan offered a small, tired smile. "There you go. Better?" She nodded, her shoulders relaxing a fraction, and that's when he heard it. The sharp slam of a car door behind him, followed by the rhythmic click of heels on concrete. He turned, sandwich still in hand, and froze. A tall woman strode forward, her figure commanding even at a distance. Black pencil skirt, crisp blazer, dark sunglasses concealing her eyes, but not the tension etched across her jaw. Her gaze locked on the girl. "Sophie," the woman's voice rang out firm and controlled. "What are you doing?" The girl. Sophie flinched, nearly dropping the sandwich. Ethan scrambled to his feet, suddenly aware of how small and stained his uniform looked under her sharp stare. I just found her here," he stammered, holding his hands up slightly. "She looked upset, and I thought—" The woman cut him off with a lift of her hand. She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that flickered with something softer when they landed on her daughter. Then they hardened again as they shifted back to Ethan. "You're the cleaner from the 17th floor, aren't you?" she asked evenly. Ethan swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." Sophie clutched the sandwich tighter. "He was nice, Mommy," she whispered, almost pleading. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy as the skyscraper looming above. The woman studied Ethan with unnerving precision, as though weighing not just his words, but the life that had carved lines into his face. Finally, she nodded once. "Thank you," she said, her tone clipped, but genuine. "Most people walked right past." She turned to an assistant hovering near the SUV. "Bring the car around." Then her gaze returned to Ethan. "You should probably come with us." Ethan blinked. "Ma'am? You're not in trouble," she clarified, voice quieter now. "But I think we need to talk." Before he could process what was happening, Ethan found himself being ushered toward the sleek black SUV. Sophie clung to his side, still nibbling at the sandwich. The driver opened the door, and Victoria, though Ethan didn't yet know her name, gestured for him to climb inside. And just like that, Ethan Cole, janitor and single father with nothing but a lunch bag and broken toy, stepped into the back seat of a billionaire's car, unaware his entire life was about to change. The SUV's door sighed shut and turned the city into a hush of filtered air and soft leather. Ethan sat forward at first, shoulders squared like a man waiting for bad news in a hospital corridor. The polished window showed a faint reflection of his uniform's frayed cuff and the stubborn cowlick he'd forgotten to flatten. Beside him, Sophie held her half-eaten sandwich as carefully as a bird taking shy bites, and watching him as if fear were a storm that had just passed. The driver eased away from the curb. Jasmine lingered in the cabin, someone's perfume, delicate and precise. An assistant in the front passenger seat held a tablet without looking back, the woman across from him. Sophie's mother sat with her ankles crossed, hands folded, sunglasses now tucked into her blazer. In the quiet, the SUV felt like a small courtroom where grace and judgment kept changing seats. "My name is Victoria Hale," she said, voice steady, eyes sharper than her tone. "I run Hale Dynamics, and I'm Sophie's mother." Ethan nodded once, uncertain whether to speak. The company logo on his chest suddenly felt louder than anything he could say. "I saw what you did on the steps," Victoria continued. "You gave away your lunch to a stranger's child without looking around to see who was watching. It wasn't a calculation," Ethan said, hearing the gravel in his own voice. "She said she was hungry." Sophie's feet bumped the seat and she flinched, then tucked them under her. "It was good," she whispered. "Turkey and cheese." Ethan's mouth tipped toward a smile. "Best there is." Victoria studied him, not the smile, but what it cost. "You're Ethan. Ethan Cole. 17th floor, night crew." "Yes, ma'am." "How long have you cleaned our building?" 8 months. "And before that—" He cleared his throat. "Before that I fixed things that broke. Engines, steel that had forgotten how to behave." He held up the scuffed plastic T-Rex, the tail snapped off and taped back. "I still fix things, I guess." "Mechanic?" she asked. "Since I was 19. He paused. "Till the world got complicated." Outside the avenue unfurled buses exhaling at corners, a woman jogging with a golden retriever, a food cart steaming on a side street. The city mocked and comforted in the same breath. Ethan let the rhythm of the tires buy him a second. "My boy Liam. He's 7, he said. Asthma's been worse this year. Nights are long. His inhaler ran out once while I was between checks. That's not a story I tell twice." He swallowed. "So I took a second shift wherever I could. Someone from your facilities team offered night. I said yes before he finished the sentence." "Where is Liam now?" Victoria asked. "At school. Miss Albright's class. He keeps a drawing of a brontosaurus in his backpack because he thinks it'll make the math less mean." Sophie perked. "I like brontosauruses. They have long necks so they can reach clouds." He nodded solemnly. "Also so they can see trouble before it sees them." The assistant in front glanced down at her tablet again. Victoria's gaze floated to the dinosaur, then to Ethan's hands, scarred knuckles, oil shadows that never fully leave. And Liam's mother, she asked the question gentle and unwelcome at once. Ethan looked at the seam where leather met door. Her name was Rachel. She was good at making anything feel like home, even a borrowed apartment with a busted oven. A drunk driver took a red light 3 winters ago. He blinked once, not trusting more. Some days the world is a glass you can't stop from slipping. Sophie stared at her knees, the sandwich paused midair. Victoria's face didn't change, but something beneath it did, like a string gently cut. "I'm sorry," she said. There was no performance in it, no polish. The words came from somewhere she didn't visit publicly. Ethan nodded. "Me too." Silence settled, not awkward, just careful. The SUV rolled through a green light that washed the interior in a thin moving emerald. Sophie took another bite slower now. "Do you have more sandwiches?" she asked, a child's hopeful audacity. "Just the one," he said lightly. "But if I'd known we were having company, I'd have doubled up." Victoria's mouth gave the smallest impression of a smile and then retreated. "Our security team lost track of Sophie this morning," she said, shifting to the other ledger in her mind. "She ran after an argument with her nanny. She hates transitions. I kept telling myself that independence was a love language, but apparently it's also a disappearing act." She exhaled not quite a sigh. "We were searching the building and the plaza." "You found her first," Luck Ethan said. "Not luck," Victoria countered. "Attention." You looked down instead of away. He didn't know how to carry a compliment from someone like her, so he set it down between them carefully. "I was late already," he admitted, "but sometimes minutes way different." The assistant looked back now. "Ms. Hale?" "I can patch in Chief Ramirez to brief." Later, Victoria said without removing her eyes from Ethan. She leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Cole, do you know how many people work under this roof?" "A lot," he said. "More than a small city. 12,000 and change. I can measure most of them. Outputs, margins, velocity. But kindness." Her head tilted. "That keeps resisting my spreadsheets." Sophie, content for the moment, leaned softly against Ethan's arm like an apology. He stilled, surprised by the trust, then allowed it, careful not to move too quickly. He thought of Liam's warm forehead pressed to his shoulder when the wheeze finally eased at 2:06 a.m. He thought of how many times he'd wanted the world to be gentler for a child. "I'm not sure what you want from me, Ms. Hale," he said quietly. "I've got 14 minutes before I'm officially late to wipe fingerprints off those elevator buttons your people love to press." "What I want," she said, "is a conversation." "With a janitor." "With a father," she corrected. "A human being who did something admirable when everyone else invested their eyes elsewhere." The driver turned into a garage ramp that circled down, then leveled into a reserved lane. The SUV slowed as if reluctant to break the spell. Victoria's posture softened an inch. She spoke in a voice pitched for only the three of them. "Mr. Cole, do you ever feel like you're standing on the wrong side of the glass?" she asked. "Like there's a room with heat and music and the good silver, and you're in the alley listening to it." Her eyes flicked to the window, then back. "I have been on both sides of that glass. The view can lie either way." "You're asking the wrong man if he knows alleys," Ethan said with a rough chuckle. "I'm asking the right one," she said. The SUV glided to a stop near a private elevator bay. The assistant opened her door, then Sophie's. The little girl slid out and without ceremony kept hold of Ethan's sleeve. He stepped onto polished concrete like a man walking into a museum barefoot. "We can talk in my office," Victoria said, climbing out. "Privacy matters." "Am I in trouble?" Ethan asked, half joking, half true. "If you were Victoria said you would not be in my car." She glanced at Sophie. "And you wouldn't still be holding my daughter's attention." Sophie craned her neck toward him. "Do you clean dinosaurs too?" she asked. "Every night," he said. "They track in more mud than you'd think." Victoria keyed the elevator a quiet beep that sounded like permission granted. The doors opened to a space with soft light and a faint scent of Edison bulbs warming. A security monitor went dark as they stepped in, as if even the cameras knew better than to intrude. The assistant stayed behind fielding calls that pinged like distant rain. The doors closed. The elevator rose smoother than most cars drove, floor numbers counting up in restrained gold. Ethan watched his reflection multiply in the mirrored steel, the line in his jaw from too many clenched nights, the threadbare collar, the plastic dinosaur now absurd in this chrome and amber carriage. "I can't pay you back for the sandwich," Victoria said suddenly. Gaze straight ahead. "I don't mean money." "You don't have to pay me at all," Ethan said. "That's the problem," she replied, and then softened it with a small breath. "No, not a problem, a reminder." That the ledger I keep isn't the only one that matters. The city slid open around them through glass terraces dressed in early light, a river wrinkling like silk, a sky that promised weather by noon. Sophie leaned her head against the paneling and hummed tunelessly. Ethan's hands found each other, fingers locking and unlocking like wrenches on a stubborn bolt. Mr. Cole, Victoria said gently, "How many people have ever asked you what you think?" He studied the floor's herringbone metal. "About mops, plenty. About people. Few," he admitted. "Fewer when I tell the truth." The elevator slowed with a whisper, settled, and opened into a corridor that looked like sound had to ask permission before it spoke. A receptionist at the far end stood up too quickly and smoothed her jacket. A wall-sized photograph of a mountain glacier gave the hallway a calm it hadn't earned. Victoria stepped out first. "This way." Ethan followed, hearing the soft thud of his boots try to behave. Sophie's shoes squeaked, and she giggled a small rebellion against all that glass. They passed doors marked with names like Constellations, Legal Strategy, Investor Relations, each a quiet galaxy with its own gravity. Past the wide glass of a conference room, a handful of executives glanced up, curiosity flashing like minnows. Victoria palmed her office door open. The room unfurled in blonde wood and daylight restrained and exact. A single white orchid sat in a pot the color of melted smoke. On a side table, a framed photo caught Ethan's attention. Sophie, as a toddler on a beach, hair wild, a woman beside her laughing in a way Victoria did not laugh now. "Please," Victoria said, gesturing to a chair before the desk. "Sit." Ethan hesitated, then sank onto leather that felt like it would keep his secrets if asked. Sophie wandered to the window and pressed her nose briefly to the glass, staring at ants that were cars far below. Victoria remained standing, as if still deciding how to take her own measure. "What I need," she said, "is perspective. I spend my days surrounded by people who speak numbers like a first language. I admire it. But sometimes we forget that numbers measure heat after the fire." She tilted her head. "You look before the flame. You notice who shivers." "I notice because I've been cold," he said. Her eyes acknowledged that truth. "Would you—" She paused, regrouped. "Would you consider telling me what you see here? Not the marble or the views or the brand names, but the people. I won't promise I'll like what you say." A thin smile. "But I promise I'll listen." He exhaled slowly, a man easing off a jack. "I'm not a consultant," he said. "Good," she answered. "Consultants tell me what sounds good in rooms like this. I want what survives the elevator ride." Sophie drifted back, clutching the crust of the sandwich like treasure. "Can Mr. Ethan stay?" she asked, urgent with the logic of children. For a bit, Victoria said, then looked to Ethan. "If he wants." He did not know how long a bit would be measured in a room like this. He only knew that choices like this were small doors that opened to long hallways. He thought of Liam's Lego Brontosaurus waiting on a chipped windowsill, of the inhaler on the counter of the secondhand backpack with a zipper that snagged. "I'll tell you what I see," he said finally, "if you can accept that it comes with oil on it." "I prefer the truth when it stains," Victoria said. In the corridor, footsteps approached, purposeful, clipped the cadence of someone who believed the hallway belonged to him. The door opened without a knock, and a man with a silver tie and a face trained to neutral stepped in. "Victoria," he said, not bothering with Ms. Hale. "I heard you were back," and his gaze landed on Ethan, slid down to the uniform, then back up a quick calculation. "We have the quarterly pre-brief in 10. "This is Mr. Cole," Victoria said. "He's with me." The man's smile held. "Marcus Kane," he said, offering a hand he didn't expect to be taken. "COO." His eyes flicked to Sophie, to the sandwich, to the dinosaur. A triangle of anomalies. "Everything." "All right, everything's changing," Victoria replied. Marcus's smile thinned by a degree only insiders notice. "Is that wise?" "We'll decide," she said. "You have 10 minutes. Use 9. She nodded toward the door. He left on a glide that made no sound and still managed an echo. Ethan looked at the hand Victoria placed on the desk, steady as a gavel. She met his eyes, and for the first time since the steps allowed something like hope into the room. "Start at the beginning," she said. He did. And by the time he finished describing what fear feels like in a hallway, and how a good idea dies when interrupting becomes a sport, the clock on the wall had already surrendered its 10 minutes and begged for more. Outside, the city brightened, unaware that inside something much braver than an agenda was assembling. When she finally spoke again, Victoria didn't ask for a report or a deck. She said, "Walk with me," as if the next door led to a different kind of day. The hallway outside Victoria's office buzzed with restrained tension like a violin string pulled too tight. Ethan followed her, Sophie trotting at his side, still holding the crust of the sandwich, as if it were a ticket to something larger. Every set of eyes they passed in the executive wing seemed to ask the same silent question. What is he doing here? Victoria ignored them all. Her stride was decisive, the click of her heels echoing off glass and marble. Ethan had to lengthen his steps to keep up his boots muffled against the carpet in ways they never were on the linoleum of the 17th floor. Sophie clutched his sleeve with her small fingers, anchoring him in a world that felt too sharp, too polished. They entered a private conference room, sleek table walls lined with screens displaying charts and graphs. A young assistant looked startled to see Ethan, but quickly busied herself with a laptop. Victoria waved her out. When the door closed, the silence pressed in. Victoria faced Ethan directly. Her eyes were darker without the shield of her sunglasses, filled with calculation and something more human beneath. "Mr. Cole," she began, "what you did this morning was not ordinary." Ethan shifted uneasily. "It was a sandwich, ma'am. Half of one." "Exactly," she said. "You gave away what little you had without hesitation. That tells me more than any resume ever could." She crossed her arms. "Tell me about your son." Ethan's throat tightened. He glanced at Sophie, who looked up at him expectantly, waiting for him to speak. "Liam," he said quietly. 7 years old. Smart, funny. Loves dinosaurs, struggles with asthma. His mother... He stopped, drew in a steadying breath. His mother passed away a few years back. It's just us now. Sophie's eyes softened as if she understood more than most children her age. She reached into her small pocket and pulled out a folded crayon drawing. It was smudged, creased, but she handed it to Ethan with solemnity. "This is for Liam," she said. "It's a brontosaurus. Tell him it can watch the clouds for him." Ethan blinked hard, caught off guard by the gesture. He accepted the paper carefully as if it were made of glass. "Thank you, Sophie. He'll love this." Victoria's expression flickered. For a moment, the rigid CEO softened into a mother watching her daughter connect in a way that money could never purchase. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Cole, I run a company that employs thousands. I see numbers, projections, charts, but what I rarely see is someone willing to act without agenda." "You did." Ethan gave a half smile. "I wasn't trying to make a statement, Ms. Hale. Just, a kid was hungry, and that's exactly why it matters," she replied. The door opened without a knock. Marcus Kane stepped in again, his tie flawless, his tone polished. "Victoria, the board is waiting on our projections." "We should." His eyes landed on Ethan. He frowned. "Why is the janitor here?" Victoria's gaze sharpened. "Marcus, meet Ethan Cole. He'll be working with us in a new capacity." Marcus blinked incredulous. "New capacity?" "Yes," she said evenly. "Consultant for internal culture development." Ethan's mouth dropped open. "Excuse me," what Marcus laughed once, cold and humorless. "You can't be serious. He scrubs toilets." And yet Victoria countered, "He saw my daughter when no one else did. He acted when others ignored her." That is precisely the kind of perspective this company needs. Ethan shook his head. "Ms. Hale, with respect, I don't know anything about consulting. I fix things, clean things. That's it." Victoria looked at him unwavering. "Exactly. You'll see what others miss because you don't live behind polished glass. You'll shadow departments, observe, give me honest feedback." "Starting salary $65,000. Health coverage included for you and your son." Ethan froze. The number didn't sound real. 65,000 health coverage for Liam. He swallowed hard, searching for words. "Why me?" he finally asked. Victoria's voice lowered. "Because, Mr. Cole, kindness is rare. And right now it may be the only thing that can save this company." Sophie tugged at his sleeve again. "Please stay," she whispered. Ethan looked down at her, then back at Victoria. His life had been a long series of closed doors. This felt like one creaking open. Still, he hesitated. I don't want charity. Victoria's jaw tightened. This isn't charity. It's an investment. From the corner, Marcus seethed silently. His fists tightened at his sides, but he said nothing. For now. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of choice heavy on his chest. All right, he said finally. I'll try. Victoria allowed herself the faintest smile. Good, then let's begin. And with that, Ethan Cole's single-father janitor bearer of sandwiches took his first step into a world he never thought he'd enter, a world of power money and scrutiny. What he didn't know yet was that kindness, the very thing that opened the door, would also make him enemies. The next morning, Ethan stood at the base of the skyscraper, staring up at its mirrored surface, as if it were daring him to enter. Yesterday, he'd slipped in through the side entrance with a mop bucket and keycard. Today, he was expected to walk through the revolving front doors like he belonged. His new uniform wasn't polyester navy with a name patch. It was a borrowed set of slacks and a button-up shirt Victoria's assistant had picked up for him late the night before. The tag had still been on the collar when he'd unfolded it. He tugged at the cuffs, now feeling the strange weight of clothing that wasn't his. He thought of Liam, who'd fallen asleep clutching Sophie's Brontosaurus drawing. His boy's breath had whistled softly through the inhaler as Ethan smoothed the blanket over him and whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Maybe this is the start of keeping them, he told himself. Inside the lobby gleamed like an airport terminal for kings. Marble floors, glass sculptures, fountains that burbled as though money itself had turned to water. People in sleek suits scanned badges and hurried toward elevators. When Ethan stepped in, conversations dimmed just enough to be noticeable. Eyes flicked from his borrowed shirt to his face recognition dawning the janitor from the 17th floor. A receptionist straightened too quickly. Security guards gave him puzzled looks. One whispered something into an earpiece. Ethan kept walking, shoulder squared, Sophie's crayon drawing folded carefully in his pocket like a talisman. Victoria met him near the turnstiles. Today she wore a steel-gray dress and carried herself with a calm that made silence follow her. Mr. Cole she greeted as though they had been colleagues for years. Ready? As I'll ever be, Ethan muttered. Beside her stood Marcus Kane, the COO, his expression carefully neutral. Only his eyes betrayed his irritation. He extended a hand Ethan didn't want to shake. Mr. Cole Marcus said smoothly, "Welcome back." Ethan clasped it briefly. Marcus's grip was strong, too strong, the kind of handshake meant to remind you who the building belonged to. Ethan will shadow various departments this week, Victoria announced. Observe, take notes. Provide me with his insights. Marcus's jaw flexed. Of course, he said. Shall we start him in marketing? Yes, Victoria replied and turned to Ethan. Listen more than you speak. Write down what you notice. Don't worry about strategy. I want humanity, not jargon. He nodded, clutching the small notebook she had handed him. Its leather cover looked out of place in his rough hands. The elevator doors opened. Ethan stepped inside with Marcus, who pressed the button for the 23rd floor. The ride was silent, except for the faint hum of machinery. Marcus glanced at Ethan's reflection in the mirrored walls. You know, Marcus said casually, Victoria has never made a decision like this. Bringing in someone without credentials. No degree, no training. It's unusual. I didn't ask for it, Ethan replied evenly. Marcus's smile was thin. That's the problem. The doors slid open to the marketing floor where rows of desks hummed with the glow of laptops and the low murmur of collaboration. A woman with a pixie cut stood to greet them. Mr. Cole Wright, I'm Bella Creative Director. She shook his hand warmly, her bracelets jingling. Welcome. The team stared curiously, waiting for Marcus to explain. He'll be observing, Marcus announced flatly. Carry on? But they didn't carry on, not really. Ethan felt the weight of their stares as he found a seat in the corner with his notebook. He watched as Bella guided a team through a campaign proposal, her ideas cut off mid-sentence by an overeager junior manager. He noticed how 3 designers shared one fried brain between them, juggling impossible deadlines with tired smiles. An intern spoke once only to be ignored completely. Ethan's pen scratched quietly. Ideas die when no one listens. Fear louder than creativity. Intern invisible. Bella second guesses self. At lunch, employees gathered in small clusters. Ethan sat at the edge of the room, pulling out his paper bag. This time there were 2 sandwiches inside he'd made an extra that morning. He ate one slowly, setting the second aside with the crayon drawing folded beneath it. Sophie's words echoed, "Tell Liam the Brontosaurus can watch the clouds for him." Someone whispered nearby, "That's the janitor, right?" Another voice, "Yeah. What's he doing here?" Ethan didn't look up. He wrote in his notebook instead. Respect earned by title fades fastest. Respect earned by kindness stays longer. When the workday ended, he rode the elevator down with Marcus again. The COO tapped away at his tablet, pretending Ethan didn't exist. Ethan glanced at his reflection in the polished steel. He barely recognized the man staring back, shirt-pressed notebook in hand, stepping out of the shadows and into something uncertain. At the lobby, Victoria waited. "First day?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. "Your company's smart," he said slowly, "but scared. People walk on eggshells." Her eyes sharpened. "Good. That's what I need you to tell me." Marcus frowned but said nothing. And as Ethan left the building that evening, the city lights flickering awake, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped onto a road with no map and no way back. The next morning, Ethan arrived early, notebook tucked into the pocket of his borrowed slacks. His nerves hummed, but beneath them was something sturdier, a quiet determination. Liam's wheezy breathing had kept him up half the night, yet when Ethan left the apartment, his son had stirred just long enough to mumble, "Go fix things, Dad." The words clung to him like armor. On the 23rd floor, the marketing team was already gathered around a whiteboard scrawled with half-finished slogans. Coffee cups cluttered the table. Bella, the creative director with the pixie cut, looked harried but determined. Ethan slipped quietly into a chair along the wall, pen poised. He didn't speak. He just watched. One by one, the team pitched ideas for the upcoming product launch. A junior associate named Kyle tried to contribute, his voice tentative. Before he could finish, another manager cut him off. Kyle fell silent, shrinking into his seat. Ethan scribbled. Young blood silenced. Confidence crushed early. Bella's campaign title hung in the air like a fragile balloon. Each time she defended it, her words grew softer, drowned by louder voices. Ethan noted the flicker in her eyes, leader who doubts herself because others interrupt too often. 3 designers worked feverishly on mock-ups, their shoulders slumped from fatigue. Ethan recognized the look. It was the same posture he saw in the mirror after triple shifts. He wrote, "Overworked." Burnout disguised as productivity. The meeting ended with half the team dissatisfied and none of the problems solved. Ethan closed his notebook slowly. The room felt heavy, not with failure but with exhaustion nobody dared name. At lunch, he headed for the cafeteria, the smell of overbrewed coffee mixed with the tang of reheated food. Clusters of employees sat in their usual groups, the silos obvious, even at the lunch tables. Ethan found a corner seat, pulling out his paper bag. Inside were 2 sandwiches. He'd made them before dawn, just as he had yesterday, one for himself, one to keep aside. The act had become ritual, a reminder of how small things mattered. He set the second sandwich down gently on the table next to Sophie's folded drawing. A woman carrying a salad tray glanced at him curiously. "You're the new consultant, right?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Something like that." "Odd choice," she murmured, but her tone wasn't cruel, just baffled. "People are talking." "People always talk," Ethan said softly. "The trick is listening for what they're not saying." That afternoon, he shadowed the design pod. Their space buzzed with frantic energy music, playing low-stress palpable. Ethan sat quietly jotting notes as they sketched, revised, argued, and sighed. He noticed how they stayed long past their allotted hours, yet no one thanked them. Later, walking the hallway, Ethan caught sight of Marcus through a glass office wall. The COO was speaking to 2 board members, his gestures sharp, his expression hard. When Marcus's eyes landed on Ethan, he paused mid-sentence, the corners of his mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Ethan looked away, unsettled. He knew that look. It was the look of a man planning something behind closed doors. By evening, Ethan returned to the maintenance lounge, the one place in the building that still smelled like home, disinfectant, floor wax, metal pipes, humming. He sat heavily, pulled out his phone, and played Liam's voicemail again. Dad, I built a dinosaur with 25 Legos. 25, I miss you. Did the CEO lady say hi today? Ethan's eyes closed. The sound of his son's excitement steadied him. He whispered to the empty room. Yeah, kid. She said hi, and maybe this means something for us. But he couldn't shake the truth written in Marcus's stare that kindness might have earned him a seat at the table, but it had also painted a target on his back. And somewhere deep in the halls of Hale Dynamics, whispers had already begun. Victoria's office was quiet, except for the low hum of the city outside the glass wall. Ethan sat across from her notebook, balanced on his knee. His shoulders sagged from the long day, but his eyes held steady. Victoria studied him like she might study a quarterly report searching for the figure that didn't add up. Well, she asked at last. Her arms were crossed, one brow lifted. You've had a week of watching. What do you see? Ethan leaned back, exhaled, and spoke slowly. Your company's smart, sharp as a blade, but blades cut both ways. People here are walking on eggshells. They don't hate the work, they're terrified of slipping. Every word feels like it's measured. They're not loyal, they're just surviving. Her lips pressed thin. She turned toward the window, the city sprawled below in ribbons of traffic and neon. You're not wrong, she murmured. Ethan hesitated, then continued. It's not the deadlines or the stress. It's fear. They're afraid that one mistake means they're done. That's no way to build anything that lasts. Victoria turned back, her expression unreadable. You speak like you've run a company. He gave a soft, tired laugh. I've run nights with a sick kid and no insurance. Doesn't teach you margins, but it teaches you people. Her gaze softened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, she wasn't the CEO of Hale Dynamics, but a mother who'd nearly lost her daughter on the steps of a tower. She walked to her desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folder. Sliding it across to him, she said, "Open it." Ethan frowned but did as told. Inside was a formal contract letterhead signatures numbers that made his stomach flip. It was a provisional appointment, consultant for cultural development. Hale Dynamics, salary, $65,000. Full health benefits for employee and dependents. He blinked, stunned. This can't be real. It's very real, Victoria said. I want you here. You saved Sophie. You gave her kindness when she was scared. And you've already seen truths most people here can't or won't. Ethan shook his head, overwhelmed. Ms. Hale, I'm a janitor. I don't belong in rooms like this. She stepped closer, her voice calm but unyielding. Mr. Cole belonging isn't a title. It's what you bring. And you've brought something we've been missing, humanity. He looked down at the contract again, his throat tight. For Liam, for all the nights spent counting coins for inhalers, this was more than a lifeline. But still, doubt gnawed at him. Why me? Victoria tilted her head. Because kindness isn't weakness. You reminded me of that? The words landed with a weight heavier than any paycheck. At that moment, the office door cracked open. Sophie peeked in, clutching a new crayon drawing. Her curls were loose, her cheeks flushed from running down the hall. She skipped inside, ignoring protocol, and thrust the paper toward Ethan. On it, she had drawn 3 stick figures sitting on a park bench, Sophie, Ethan, and a smaller boy with a dinosaur in his hand. Above them, in crooked letters, she had written, family. Ethan's throat closed. He blinked hard, willing his eyes not to betray him. Victoria reached for the drawing, but Sophie shook her head and pressed it firmly into Ethan's hands. It's yours, she said. You and Liam can keep it. He stared at the paper, his calloused fingers trembling around the edges. No one had called him family in years, not since Rachel, not since everything had broken. Victoria cleared her throat, her voice low. She's drawn you 3 times this week. Ethan swallowed hard. She shouldn't. I'm nobody. Sophie frowned. You're somebody to me. Silence stretched warm and fragile. For once, Victoria didn't try to fill it with business. She simply looked at Ethan, her eyes more vulnerable than he'd ever seen them. Finally, she said, Take the contract home. Think about it. But know this, sometimes the smallest act changes everything. Ethan folded the contract carefully, tucking it behind Sophie's drawing. "I'll think about it," he said softly. And as he left her office that night, the city's lights bleeding into the dark sky, Ethan realized something had shifted. He wasn't just carrying a sandwich anymore. He was carrying a chance, one he hadn't dared hope for in years. But outside the office, in the shadows of the hallway, Marcus Kane watched him leave. His smile was thin, his eyes colder than glass. He muttered under his breath, "Let's see how long you last, janitor." The war had only just begun. The days that followed carried a strange rhythm, half wonder, half warning. Ethan walked the marble halls with his leather notebook tucked under his arm, shadowing teams from accounting to logistics. Some employees smiled cautiously when he entered, curious about the janitor-turned-consultant. Others looked through him as if pretending he wasn't there might erase him. But everywhere he went, Ethan kept listening, hearing not just the words people said, but the silences they swallowed. In human resources, he noticed how staff tiptoed around managers, careful not to voice concerns. In accounting, he saw exhaustion etched in faces buried behind screens, fear sharpening their focus more than pride. He filled page after page, morale brittle. Fear contagious. Good ideas strangled by hierarchy. Every night he returned home to Liam, who would bounce on the threadbare couch and pepper him with questions. "Did the CEO lady talk to you today, Dad? Did you fix anything?" Ethan always smiled, tousling his son's hair. "I listened," he'd answer. Sometimes listening fixes more than hammers. But even as Ethan adjusted to this new world, Marcus Kane grew restless. The COO spent his evenings in shadowed conference rooms, pulling close a handful of trusted lieutenants. Their voices were hushed but sharp enough to cut. Marcus paced at the head of the table, his polished shoes clicking against tile. "Do you see what's happening?" he snapped. "Claire Hale is letting sentiment cloud her judgment. A janitor, ladies and gentlemen. She plucked a janitor off the floor and dropped him into our meetings like he belongs here." One executive shifted uncomfortably. "He's harmless. Probably a passing fascination for her." Marcus slammed a folder onto the table. "Harmless. He's sitting across from me in strategy sessions. Claire listens to him. Really listens. She hasn't done that with us in years." Another whispered, "What's your plan?" Marcus leaned forward, eyes hard as flint. "I'm going to prove Ethan Cole isn't who he says he is. Everyone has skeletons. And when I find his, Claire will have no choice but to throw him out." He typed an email on his tablet. Right then, fingers stabbing at the screen. Subject line, background check, Ethan Cole. Recipient, a private investigator who owed him favors. His final words before hitting send were low and venomous, "Dig deep. Find dirt." While Marcus plotted, Ethan was planning something else entirely. Late one evening, after shadowing yet another strained meeting, Ethan sat in the cafeteria alone. His notebook lay open, filled with scribbles. He tapped his pen against the page, an idea forming. This company was starving for connection, for a reason to look at one another without suspicion. And maybe he couldn't fix balance sheets, but he could fix something human. The next morning, he put his plan into motion. He called it Table Talks. He asked the cafeteria staff to set aside a section of long tables. During lunch, he invited employees, no matter their department rank or title, to sit down beside someone they'd never spoken to before and share a meal. Just 20 minutes. No agendas. No roles. Just people. At first, only a handful came. A junior accountant, an HR intern, 2 designers with tired eyes. Ethan sat with them, sandwich in hand, starting simple conversations. Where they grew up, what food reminded them of home. The funniest mistake they ever made on the job. Laughter came hesitantly at first, like rain after a drought, but word spread. By the third day, the section buzzed with energy. A CFO's assistant traded recipes with a warehouse coordinator. A shy programmer shared parenting tips with a product designer. Across the room, Ethan spotted something he never expected: Victoria Hale herself, seated beside a junior accountant, listening intently and smiling faintly as the young woman spoke. Ethan's chest tightened. For the first time, Hale dynamics felt alive. He leaned back, sipping burnt cafeteria coffee, watching the transformation unfold. His notebook lay open on the table, but for once he didn't write. He just observed a quiet pride blooming. But not everyone was smiling. From the doorway, Marcus watched with narrowed eyes, his jaw rigid. He could feel control slipping through his fingers, replaced by a janitor's simple act of kindness. The laughter, the warmth, those belonged to Ethan now. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at the message from the investigator. "Got something? Call me tonight." His lips curled into a thin smile. "Enjoy your lunch, Cole," he muttered under his breath. "It'll be your last as a hero." By noon the following day, the cafeteria was louder than Ethan had ever heard it. Conversations overlapped, laughter spilled between tables, and strangers leaned toward one another with the ease of old friends. "Table Talks," the sign Ethan had scrawled in marker on a piece of poster board, sat taped to the wall, crooked but proud. He lingered at the edge, coffee in hand, watching it all. Employees from finance sat beside engineers. A receptionist swapped stories with a product manager. Kyle, the timid junior associate from marketing, was telling a joke, and people were actually laughing with him, not over him. Ethan caught himself smiling. This was what he'd wanted to see people remembering, that work didn't have to mean fear. It could mean connection. Across the room, Victoria Hale sat at a table with two entry-level analysts. Her blazer was still immaculate, her posture precise, but there was something softer in her expression. When one of the analysts nervously explained an idea, Victoria listened. Really listened, and then said words no one thought she was capable of. "You're doing a great job." The analyst's eyes widened as though they'd been handed gold. Around them, whispers spread. If Victoria Hale could say that, maybe the culture truly was changing. Ethan ducked his head, not wanting credit. He sipped the coffee, burnt and bitter, but it tasted like hope. And then the storm hit. The cafeteria doors slammed open. Marcus Kane strode in, silver tie, sharp file folder clutched in his hand. His voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "Cole," he barked. The room fell silent. Forks paused halfway to mouths, conversations froze. Ethan set down his cup slowly and turned. Marcus held up the file. "We need to talk. Now." Victoria rose instantly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Marcus?" She snapped. "Not here." But Marcus ignored her, his eyes locked on Ethan. "I ran a background check," he announced loudly, his words echoing off tile and glass. "And guess what? Our janitor turned consultant forgot to disclose a few things." A ripple went through the room. Ethan stood still, his hands resting loosely at his sides. His jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. Marcus flipped open the folder dramatically. Multiple job losses, a DUI from a decade ago, dropped out of community college, and yet here you are whispering in the CEO's ear as if you belong at this table. Gasps and murmurs spread. Ethan could feel every eye burning into him. Sophie wasn't here to defend him this time. Only his own truth stood between him and humiliation. Victoria's voice was ice. "Marcus, office, now." But Ethan lifted a hand, his voice calm and even. "No," he said softly. "Let him finish." Marcus smirked, emboldened. "You don't belong here. You're a glorified janitor playing executive dress-up. This company doesn't need a charity case. It needs professionals." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His knuckles whitened around the edge of the table, but his voice, when it came, was steady. "I disclosed everything required by HR. The DUI was expunged years ago. I've never hidden who I am. But you're right, Marcus. I don't have degrees or polished titles." He glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of the employees who'd begun to trust him. "All I have is the truth. And the truth is this: you only dig up someone's past when you're afraid of their future." The cafeteria was utterly silent. Then a murmur rose, soft at first, then louder. People nodded. Some clapped. Victoria stepped forward, her voice sharp as glass. "Marcus Kane, you're suspended pending review." Marcus's smirk vanished. "Suspended." "For exposing the truth," No, Victoria said coldly. "For forgetting what this company stands for. People don't need perfect resumes. They need purpose. And you've forgotten that." Security appeared at the door. Marcus sputtered, rage coloring his face, but as he was escorted out, he hissed, "You'll regret this." The cafeteria exhaled all at once. Conversations started again, tentative but stronger. Employees glanced at Ethan not just with respect, but with trust. Ethan picked up his coffee once more. His hand still shook, but inside something had hardened. He wasn't here for titles or boardrooms. He was here because fear had ruled too long. And though Marcus was gone from the room, Ethan knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The cafeteria gradually returned to its normal hum, but the air felt different, charged alive, as though something irreversible had just happened. Ethan sat quietly. Notebook closed while employees whispered around him. Some approached with hesitant smiles, a pat on the back, a murmured, "Thanks for standing up." For the first time, respect wasn't filtered through titles or roles. It was earned. Yet Ethan couldn't relax. Marcus's parting words clung like smoke. "You'll regret this." That evening, after most had gone home, Ethan lingered in the maintenance lounge. The walls smelled of bleach and steel, comfortingly familiar. He pulled out his phone and pressed play on Liam's newest voicemail. "Dad, guess what I made a T-Rex out of Legos? It's scary but funny. I wish you could see it. Did the CEO lady let you fix anything today?" Ethan closed his eyes, smiling faintly. "Yeah, buddy," he whispered. "I fixed something." But upstairs, Marcus was already moving his pieces. Suspended from his duties, he refused to retreat quietly. In a dimly lit bar downtown, he gathered a few allies executives who thrived under his iron control. Over whiskey glasses and whispered bitterness, Marcus stoked their doubts. "Claire Hale has lost perspective," he said. Voice low but venomous. "She's gambling the company on a janitor. Do you trust her judgment? Or mine?" A few heads nodded reluctantly. At first, then firmer. Marcus leaned in. "We dig deeper. Cole's record is only the surface. There has to be more. Everyone has weaknesses, and when we find his Hale, we'll have no choice but to cut him loose." Meanwhile, Ethan spent the next week shadowing new departments. In logistics, he noted how warehouse workers were pushed to exhaustion without recognition. In IT, he saw how staff covered failures, quietly afraid of blame. His notebook filled with observations. Fear punishes mistakes faster than it rewards effort. Trust absent, potential wasted. Victoria called him into her office late Friday. She stood by the window, city lights burning like stars across the skyline. "Tell me," she said. Ethan set down his notebook, opening it to the latest page. "Your people are smart-driven, but they're tired of walking on glass. They want to matter. Right now they survive. But they don't belong, and that's on leadership." Her jaw tightened, but her eyes stayed on him. "On me?" "Yes," Ethan said gently. "You built something powerful, Ms. Hale. But power alone doesn't inspire. Purpose does." For a long time, Victoria didn't move. Then she walked to her desk and pulled open a drawer. From it, she retrieved a manila folder and handed it to him. Inside was a permanent contract. Salary raised, full benefits secured for Liam, training programs included. At the bottom, in handwriting sharper than any signature, were 6 words. "Kindness isn't weakness." "Thank you, Ethan." He looked up stunned. Victoria met his eyes. "You gave my daughter half a sandwich. I'm trying to give your son a future." Before Ethan could speak, a knock came at the door. Sophie peeked in, crayon drawing clutched in her hand. This one showed 3 figures again. Sophie, Ethan, and Liam standing beneath a giant brontosaurus with clouds above its head. "She's drawn you 3 times this week," Victoria murmured. Ethan swallowed hard, emotion pressing against his throat. He crouched down, meeting Sophie's bright eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. Sophie grinned. "You're my hero, Mr. Ethan." Victoria watched silently, her expression unreadable. For the first time in years, the walls of her office felt less like barriers and more like windows. But down on the street, a different storm was brewing. Marcus's investigator had found something, and he was eager to deliver it. Night had settled over the city like a heavy blanket. From the 17th floor, Ethan sat alone in the break room reserved for maintenance staff. The fluorescent lights buzzed, the vending machine hummed, and the familiar smell of ammonia clung to the walls. Despite the chaos of the past week, this room felt like neutral ground where he could breathe without eyes following him. On the table lay the contract Victoria had given him. He hadn't signed yet. His fingers traced the bold lettering of his name, Ethan Cole, Consultant for Cultural Development. It felt surreal. One signature and Liam's future would change. No more inhalers rationed, no more wondering if he'd make rent. Stability, something he hadn't dared to dream of. His phone buzzed. A voicemail from Liam. He pressed play. "Dad." Miss Albright said I read better than last week. I told her it's because you always make me sound out the hard words. Oh, and my Brontosaurus drawing is guarding your sandwich so you don't forget to eat. I love you. Ethan smiled, eyes stinging. Love you too, kid, he whispered into the quiet. He didn't hear the door at first. A shadow fell across the floor tiles. Victoria stood there, jacket draped over her arm. She looked less like a CEO now and more like a mother at the end of a long day, tired but holding herself together. You work late, Ethan said softly. She stepped inside, lowering her voice. So do you. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence. Finally, Victoria leaned against the table opposite him. I owe you honesty, she said. I built this company with Wall's strict rules, fear if necessary. It worked. Profits soared. But it cost me more than I realized. Even Sophie, she's grown up surrounded by people who obey, not care. Ethan met her eyes. Fear gets results, but it doesn't build trust. Her lips quirked faintly. You sound like my conscience, he chuckled. Not sure you want a janitor for that. I might, she said quietly. The words hung between them, heavier than contracts, heavier than titles. Victoria's gaze shifted toward the contract on the table. You haven't signed. I wanted to be sure, Ethan admitted. I've taken jobs out of desperation before, but this is different. If I sign, I need to believe I'm doing more than trading mops for meetings. And do you? Ethan hesitated, then nodded. I think maybe I do. For the first time, Victoria's steel mask cracked. Her eyes softened, the corners shimmering with something unspoken. Sophie hasn't stopped talking about you. She says you make her feel safe. Ethan swallowed. She makes me feel like I matter. The moment stretched fragile and real. Then the sound of footsteps shattered it. The door burst open. Marcus strode in, his expression tight, his tie loosened as though he'd been pacing for hours. Victoria, he said, ignoring Ethan, we need to talk. Her tone iced over. You're suspended. I don't care, Marcus snapped. He dropped a file onto the table. Papers spilled out, photocopies, old records. Your janitor turned savior has skeletons, gaps in work history, a DUI, dropped out of school. Is this really the man you want whispering in your ear? Ethan's stomach clenched. He closed his eyes briefly, then looked up. His voice was calm. That DUI was 10 years ago. It was expunged. I've owned every mistake I've made, and those gaps? He leaned forward. That was me burying my wife. That was me raising my boy alone. Those gaps are my life. Marcus sneered. Convenient story. But Victoria's gaze never left Ethan's face. She saw no fear, no evasion, only truth. Enough, Marcus, she said coldly. You've forgotten something vital. People aren't resumes, they're purpose. Marcus's jaw worked furiously, but he saw the decision in her eyes. Without another word, he stormed out the door, slamming behind him. Silence returned heavy, but cleansing. Ethan exhaled slowly. That man won't stop. No, Victoria agreed. But neither will we. She slid the contract back toward him, her hand brushing his. Sign it. Build something with me. Not for shareholders, for people. Ethan looked at her, at the faint hope flickering in eyes that had spent years hiding behind glass. He thought of Liam's voice. Sophie's drawing, the cafeteria filled with laughter. Slowly, deliberately, he picked up the pen. And as his name bled onto the page, a new chapter began, one neither of them could have predicted. By Monday morning, the building felt different. Employees passed each other in the lobby with nods instead of blank stares. Small talk sprouted in elevators, and for the first time, laughter drifted through corridors usually sealed in silence. Ethan walked among them in his pressed shirt notebook under his arm, still feeling like an imposter. But everywhere he went, people glanced up with something resembling trust. Victoria had made it official. Ethan Cole was now Director of Cultural Development, though he still introduced himself humbly as just Ethan. Titles didn't interest him. What mattered was what he'd started to see, the cracks in the glass tower and the people hiding inside them. That evening, Victoria invited Ethan and Liam to join her and Sophie for dinner at her penthouse. Ethan hesitated at first. His entire life had been spent in places where rent was late paint peeled and neighbors yelled through thin walls. But Sophie's pleading smile convinced him. "Please come," she said on the phone, her voice bubbling with hope. "Liam can meet my Brontosaurus. I named it Cloud Watcher." So Ethan agreed. The penthouse soared above the city walls of glass opening onto a skyline painted in twilight hues. When the elevator doors parted, Liam clutched his father's hand tightly, his eyes wide as saucers. "Dad," he whispered, "this place is taller than the dinosaurs." Sophie darted forward, squealing, "You must be Liam." She grabbed his hand and tugged him toward a living room bigger than their entire apartment. There, on a rug patterned with constellations, sat a Brontosaurus plush nearly as tall as the children. Liam's face lit up. For the first time in months, Ethan saw his boy forget about wheezing lungs and homework battles. Victoria watched from the doorway, her posture less rigid than usual. She carried a tray of lemon water and smiled faintly as the children collapsed in giggles over the plush dinosaur. Ethan stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets. "Thank you for this," he said quietly. Victoria tilted her head. "I should be thanking you." Sophie hasn't laughed like that in a long time. Dinner was a strange blend of worlds. Victoria's dining table gleamed under chandelier light, each place setting, precise the meal plated by a chef who vanished discreetly afterward. But Liam, unused to silver cutlery, asked if he could just eat with his fork and fingers. Ethan started to apologize, but Victoria waved it off. "Comfort is more important than protocol," she said gently. As the children devoured dessert, Victoria leaned closer to Ethan. "You're doing more than shifting culture, you know. You're showing Sophie what trust looks like." "And me." Ethan lowered his eyes, uncomfortable with praise. "I'm just trying to be the man my son thinks I am." Victoria studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the only kind worth being." For a brief evening, walls fell away. Sophie and Liam played hide-and-seek in the hallways, laughter echoing like bells. Victoria and Ethan sat on the balcony, the city glittering beneath them. They didn't talk about contracts or culture. They talked about loss, Rachel, the wife Ethan had buried, Victoria's late husband taken too soon by illness. Grief bridged the space between them, but so did resilience. Yet not all was quiet. While they laughed softly over the children's antics, Marcus Kane was hard at work in the shadows. Banished from his duties, he had not been idle. He dug deeper into Ethan's past, desperate to find a crack wide enough to break him. That night, Marcus received a call from his investigator. The voice on the line was smug. "I found something. Not illegal, but damaging. Records of eviction notices, medical debts, times when Cole couldn't pay bills. He's been hiding struggle his whole life. Present that to the board and he'll look like instability wrapped in rags." Marcus smiled coldly. "Perfect. Tomorrow we remind Victoria Hale that empires don't run on sympathy." Back at the penthouse, Ethan tucked Liam into a guest bed softer than anything he'd ever slept on. Sophie pressed a crayon drawing into his hand before she went to bed, a sketch of their two families sitting at the same table smiling. "Good night, Mr. Ethan," she whispered. "Don't go away." Ethan looked at the drawing long after the children had fallen asleep. Something stirred in his chest, a fragile hope he hadn't felt in years. But downstairs, beyond the glass walls and soft rugs, a storm was already gathering, one that would test whether kindness alone could withstand power, sharpened into a blade. Morning light spilled across the glass tower, gilding its edges in gold. From the outside, Hale Dynamics looked invincible steel glass and wealth stacked 100 stories high. But inside, cracks were spreading like hairline fractures in ice. Ethan arrived early, as he always did. He carried Liam's crayon drawing tucked into his notebook, its crooked lines a reminder of what mattered. As he walked through the lobby, employees nodded to him. A custodian gave him a quiet thumbs up. A junior analyst whispered, "Thanks for yesterday." Ethan felt both humbled and uneasy. Respect could turn as quickly as it came. Upstairs, Victoria summoned him to her office. She stood at the window, her silhouette outlined by the rising sun. "I need to show you something," she said, sliding a folder across the desk. Ethan opened it. Inside were spreadsheets, columns of numbers, expense reports, projections. But one detail stood out. Funds had been moved from internal development accounts to Shell's subsidiaries. The amounts were staggering. "This isn't just sloppy accounting," Victoria said grimly. "It's manipulation. Someone's been rerouting money, hiding losses." Ethan frowned, flipping through the pages. Who has access? Marcus, she answered without hesitation, and a handful of executives loyal to him. He's been careful, but not careful enough. You stumbled close to it with your notes about overworked staff and missing resources. I think he's been bleeding us from within to keep control. Ethan closed the folder, his jaw tightening. What are you going to do? I should fire him outright, Victoria said. But Marcus knows this company's underbelly. If I move too quickly, he'll spin it. The board will believe him. They already think I've lost perspective because of you. Her eyes locked on his. I need evidence, real proof, and I need you to help me find it. Ethan felt the weight of her words. He was no investigator. He was a father, a man who used to fix carburetors and mop floors. Yet somehow he had become the hinge on which an empire turned. Why me? He asked quietly. Because Marcus underestimates you, she said simply. That's your advantage. Ethan thought of Liam, of Sophie's plea not to leave. He nodded slowly. All right, let's do it. That night, Ethan stayed late, combing through files in the maintenance lounge, where few would notice him. He traced missing funds, followed digital breadcrumbs. His calloused fingers smudged ink as he scribbled in his notebook, Marcus moving money into personal shells, using staff fear to cover gaps. The deeper he dug, the angrier he grew. People were burning themselves out while Marcus lined his pockets. Near midnight, Ethan found what he needed, a transfer request Marcus had signed personally disguised as consulting expenses. Ethan stared at the page heat rising in his chest. This was the proof Victoria needed. But in that same moment, Marcus was moving too. In a quiet downtown office, Marcus sat with his investigator reviewing a different folder, Ethan's history. Not crimes, not scandals, just scars. Eviction notices, medical debt, past due bills, the kind of paper trail poverty leaves behind. Not illegal, the investigator admitted, but it paints him as unstable, reckless, unfit for the position Hale's given him. Marcus smirked. Perfect. Tomorrow, I'll put this in front of the board. They won't see a hero, they'll see a liability. Back at the skyscraper, Ethan leaned back in his chair, exhaustion tugging at his eyes. He picked up Liam's crayon drawing, tracing the crooked smiles with his thumb. I'm doing this for you, kid, he whispered. For us. He didn't realize Marcus was already sharpening the knife. The following morning broke with restless skies, clouds hanging low. The city wrapped in a gray hush. Ethan felt that weight as he stepped off the bus, his notebook tucked under his arm. He carried the evidence against Marcus, ready to hand it to Victoria. But he also carried the gnawing sense that the fight wasn't going to end with numbers on a page. When he entered the building, the atmosphere was off. Conversations hushed as he passed. Eyes followed him longer than usual. By the time he reached the executive floor, he understood why. Marcus had beaten him to the punch. The boardroom was packed when Ethan arrived, members gathered around the long glass table, murmurs sharp as knives. At the head stood Marcus Kane, his silver tie gleaming, his expression controlled triumph. A file lay open before him, pages fanned like evidence in a trial. Victoria sat rigid in her chair, lips pressed tight, eyes stormy but silent. Marcus gestured broadly. Ladies and gentlemen, before we hand over our culture, our reputation to an outsider with no qualifications, perhaps you should know who he really is. He held up a page. Ethan recognized it instantly. Eviction notices, past due bills, medical debt. A history written in overdue envelopes and broken promises. This, Marcus said smoothly, is Ethan Cole, a man who has stumbled from job to job, unable to keep his finances straight, unable to support his own family. Do you really believe this is who should advise us on culture? Do you want the future of Hale Dynamics shaped by instability? Murmurs rose, sharp and judgmental. Some board members frowned at Ethan with suspicion. Ethan stepped forward slowly, his hands at his sides. He looked at Marcus, then at the board. His voice was quiet but steady. He's not lying. Those are real. I've been evicted. I've been broke. I've stared at medical bills, wondering which ones I could pay and which ones would have to wait. I've lost jobs, lost sleep, and I've made mistakes. He paused, letting the silence settle. But I'm not ashamed. Because every line on those papers is the story of a man who kept going. I buried my wife after a drunk driver took her from me. I raised my son alone through nights when his asthma nearly stole his breath, and I worked every job that would take me no matter how hard to keep him alive. He looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes. Yes, I've failed, but those failures taught me more about people than any degree or title. They taught me that what people need isn't perfection, it's purpose. And that's something you can't buy with a resume. For a long moment, the room was silent. Then a soft voice broke it. He's right. All heads turned. Sophie had slipped quietly into the boardroom, a folded piece of paper clutched in her small hands. She walked to Ethan and pressed it into his palm. He opened it slowly. A drawing, him holding a sandwich standing between two stick-figure children. Above them in shaky letters, "You're my hero, Mr. Ethan." Sophie looked up, her voice clear despite its tremble. "He gave me food when I was hungry. He makes me feel safe." Isn't that what heroes do? The board shifted uncomfortably. Some averted their eyes. Others softened. Victoria rose, her chair scraping against the floor. Her voice was firm. "Marcus, this stops now. You've forgotten what leadership means. It isn't about spotless records. It's about courage, about the willingness to see people not just numbers." Marcus's face darkened. "You're ruining this company for sentiment." "No," Victoria snapped. "You nearly ruined it by bleeding us dry." Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan stepped forward, placing the folder of evidence he'd uncovered onto the table. "Marcus has been rerouting company funds into shell accounts. This isn't about me, it's about him." The board erupted, papers shuffled, voices rose. Marcus paled, then tried to recover. "This is fabrication signed by you," Ethan cut in, pointing to the transfer request with Marcus's own signature. Security entered the room at Victoria's nod. Marcus's bravado collapsed into fury. "You'll regret this, Hale," he hissed as they took him by the arms. His eyes seared into Ethan. "And you, this isn't over." He was escorted out the door, slamming behind him. Silence lingered. Then Victoria turned to Ethan, her voice softer. "You gave my daughter a sandwich. Today, you gave this company back its integrity. Thank you." Ethan looked at Sophie's drawing again, his throat tight. He wasn't sure about integrity or heroism or even belonging. All he knew was that he'd faced the storm and hadn't run this time. The storm Marcus left behind didn't clear overnight. It lingered in whispered doubts and the cautious glances of executives who wondered whether Victoria Hale had staked too much on one man's decency. Though Marcus was escorted out, his words still echoed in board members' ears. "Do you really trust him with your future?" The board convened an emergency session the following week. Victoria faced them alone. Her usual poise sharpened into steel. Ethan sat quietly at the back notebook, balanced on his knee, though the room felt like a courtroom, and he the defendant. "We are not here." Victoria began to debate resumes or polished records. "We are here to decide what kind of company we want to be." One board member, a man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, leaned forward. "We cannot build an empire on sentiment. Investors demand results, not sob stories." Victoria's gaze was cold. "Then perhaps you've forgotten results are built on people. And when people are driven by fear, they give the minimum. But when they're driven by purpose, they'll give you everything." Another member frowned. "Purpose doesn't pay dividends." Ethan cleared his throat softly. All eyes turned. He hadn't been asked to speak, but he rose anyway, steadying his voice. "With respect, purpose pays more than dividends. It pays loyalty. I've seen it in your hallways these past weeks." People laughed in the cafeteria again. They started to trust each other. That didn't happen because of fear. It happened because for the first time they felt seen. The silver-haired man scoffed. "And what makes you the authority?" Ethan held his gaze. "Because I've lived on the other side of your numbers. I've been the man fired when profits slipped. I've been the father who had to choose between rent and medicine. And I can tell you fear might keep people's heads down, but it won't keep them here. They'll leave. Or worse, they'll stay and give you nothing of themselves." The board fell into uneasy silence. Victoria seized the pause. "Give me 30 days. Let Ethan's initiatives continue. If productivity and retention don't improve, you can vote to terminate his position. But if they do, you'll see that investing in purpose is the smartest decision you've ever made." The board members exchanged wary glances, then nodded reluctantly. 30 days, the chairman said. No more. When the meeting ended, Ethan followed Victoria into the corridor. His chest felt tight, not with fear, but with the sheer weight of expectation. 30 days, he muttered. That's not much time. Victoria's expression softened. It's enough. I trust you. The word startled him. Trust simple, rare, priceless. He nodded. Then I'll give it everything I have. That night, Ethan worked late. He sketched out an idea on the whiteboard in the maintenance lounge, a program to connect departments through mentorship pairing senior staff with juniors and cross-functional teams. Not to talk about numbers, but about stories, what drove them, what they wanted out of their work. He called it Project Anchor. The next week, the program launched. Slowly at first, then with momentum. Employees began sharing meals, then stories, then ideas. Productivity ticked upward, not because deadlines loosened, but because people rediscovered why they cared. The intern Kyle, once silent in meetings, pitched a campaign idea that caught fire. Bella, the creative director, led with new confidence, no longer silenced. Victoria walked through the halls and saw faces lift toward her instead of away. For the first time, she felt her company breathe. But Marcus wasn't gone. Not really. In a shadowed office across town, he leaned back in a leather chair, watching reports trickle in. His lips curled into a cold smile. Enjoy your 30 days, Cole, he muttered. I'll make sure it's your last. The first 2 weeks of the 30-day trial passed like a storm, rolling in reverse, tension, receding color, returning to gray skies. The halls of Hale Dynamics, once stiff and sterile, now buzzed with small bursts of humanity. People stayed an extra 10 minutes after meetings to talk, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Ethan saw it everywhere. Kyle, the intern, once silenced, now spoke freely in brainstorming sessions. Bella, the creative director, stopped second-guessing herself and began mentoring juniors who admired her quiet grit. Departments that once worked in silos were sharing resources, even celebrating small wins together. Project Anchor was working. Victoria noticed it too. Walking the corridors with Ethan at her side, she saw employees lift their heads, some even daring to smile. It unsettled her at first. Smiles weren't something she'd associated with efficiency, but as the reports came in, numbers didn't lie, productivity ticked up, turnover slowed, absenteeism dropped. One evening, she called Ethan into her office. She held up a printout of metrics, her face unreadable. Do you see this? Ethan braced himself. Bad. Her lips curved just slightly. The opposite. Employee satisfaction is up 17% in 2 weeks. Engagement scores doubled. That's unheard of. Ethan shrugged, uneasy with praise. People just needed permission to matter. Victoria set the papers down and leaned closer. And you gave it to them. He looked away, cheeks warming. I just started something. They're the ones carrying it. For a moment, silence filled the room, warm and almost fragile. Then Sophie burst in, crayon in hand. Daddy? Oh, sorry, mister. Ethan, she corrected quickly, cheeks flushing. Look what I drew. She held up a picture of 4 figures herself. Ethan, Liam, and Victoria all standing beneath a rainbow. Ethan blinked, throat tightening. He crouched, taking the paper carefully. That's beautiful, Sophie. Victoria watched something unspoken softening her face. But outside the warmth of that office, Marcus was plotting. Suspension hadn't broken him. It had sharpened him. In secret meetings with sympathetic board members, he whispered poison. The numbers may look good now, but this isn't sustainable. He's stirring emotion, not stability. When this bubble bursts, it'll take the company with it. He produced a dossier, his voice low and calculated. Coal is a liability. Evictions. Medical debt. A DUI. Do you think investors will trust a man like that to shape culture? He's not an inspiration. He's a risk. And when this experiment collapses, it will be Hale's head on the chopping block. Some board members hesitated. Others nodded grimly. Marcus pressed harder. Give me the floor on day 30. Let me prove he doesn't belong. By the time I'm done, neither Cole nor Hale will have a leg to stand on. Back in the company, Ethan kept his head down, working alongside employees, scribbling notes, eating sandwiches at table talks. Yet he couldn't shake the unease in the air. One evening, after another long day, he sat in the maintenance lounge, staring at Liam's latest voicemail. Dad? I got a gold star in reading today. I wish you were there. Can we get pizza Friday? I'll share mine with you. Ethan smiled tiredly. Yeah, buddy, we'll get pizza. Always. But as he pocketed his phone, he caught his reflection in the vending machine's glass-tired eyes, weight on his shoulders. He whispered to himself, "Don't let them take this from you." Upstairs in a corner office, Marcus looked out at the city's nightscape. His smile was cold, his voice a murmur. You may think kindness saves you, Cole, but in 30 days, kindness won't matter. Power will. And somewhere deep inside, Ethan knew the storm wasn't over. It was gathering. The 30 days dwindled fast, and with each passing sunrise, the pressure thickened. Ethan felt it in every corridor, the way executives studied him like a question mark, the way employees whispered encouragement but glanced nervously at closed doors. Victoria kept her composure, but Ethan could see it in her eyes. She knew the board was sharpening their knives. The day of reckoning arrived with a chill rain streaking down the tower's windows. Ethan was summoned to the top floor, where the board convened in their grand chamber, a room lined with mahogany and portraits of past leaders glaring down like judges from another century. Marcus was already there. Though suspended, he'd managed to charm his way back into the room, armed with a stack of papers and that same silver tie. His smile was razor thin. The chairman cleared his throat. We are here to assess whether this cultural initiative has merit. Mr. Kane has evidence to present. Mr. Cole, you may respond. Marcus rose smoothly. Ladies and gentlemen, I warned you, this company cannot be guided by sentimentality. And today I'll show you why. He clicked a remote and the screens lit up with charts and graphs. At first they looked damning short-term metrics. Marcus twisted to imply decline. Then came photos of eviction notices, red-stamped bills, even an image of Ethan's rusted apartment door. This is your so-called director of culture, Marcus said, voice dripping with disdain. A man who can't even manage his own life. Do you expect him to manage the soul of Hale Dynamics investors will laugh us out of the market? The board murmured some nodding. Marcus pressed harder. And this supposed improvement in morale temporary. Manufactured. When the bubble bursts, the damage will be irreversible. Are you willing to gamble billions on a janitor's pity project? He sat smug, certain of his victory. Ethan rose slowly, clutching his notebook. His voice was quiet, almost fragile, but it carried. Marcus is right about one thing. I've been broke. I've been evicted. I failed more times than I can count. He paused, letting the weight settle. But those failures taught me more about people than any title. They taught me that fear makes people small. Purpose makes them great. He flipped open his notebook, sliding forward sheets of testimony, handwritten notes from employees who had joined Project Anchor. Stories of interns finding their voices, designers rediscovering creativity, managers learning to listen. This isn't theory. This is your people. They are not surviving anymore. They are beginning to belong. The board studied the papers, voices hushed. Marcus leapt up, waving his hand dismissively. A few feel-good anecdotes. You can't run a corporation on crayon drawings and cafeteria laughter. At that, Victoria rose. Her voice sliced through the noise. Enough! The room fell silent. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on Marcus. You accuse me of sentiment, Marcus, but I accuse you of sabotage. She lifted a folder Ethan had given her. Here are the transfer requests you signed, funds rerouted into your shell companies. Embezzlement plain and simple. Gasps echoed around the chamber. Marcus paled. That's fabrication? Signed by your hand, Victoria shot back, slamming the page onto the table. The board erupted in chaos, members demanding explanations, security already moving. Marcus' sputtered face blotched with rage. He pointed at Ethan, his last weapon. This is his doing. He set me up. Ethan shook his head calmly. No, Marcus, you set yourself up. I just stopped looking away. Security gripped Marcus's arms. He thrashed once, then sagged. His voice dropped to a hiss as they dragged him toward the door. This isn't over, Cole. You don't belong here. And when this all burns down, you'll burn with it. The doors slammed shut behind him. Silence lingered like smoke. Then the chairman cleared his throat. Ms. Hale, what do you propose? Victoria straightened, her voice steady. That we stop building on fear. That we build on purpose. and that we trust the man who reminded us what that means. She turned to Ethan, her eyes softer. Director Cole, are you ready to lead? Ethan swallowed, overwhelmed, but nodded. For Liam, for Sophie, for everyone here. Yes. Applause rose, not thunderous but real. For the first time, Ethan felt not like an intruder but like someone who belonged. Still, Marcus's words clung in the corners of his mind like shadows. This isn't over. The weeks following Marcus's removal unfolded like dawn after a storm. Slow, cautious, but brightening, Ethan signed the permanent contract, though his hands trembled when the ink bled across the page. Overnight, he became Director of Culture and Purpose, a title he never could have imagined when he first offered half a sandwich on the steps of the tower. His office was small compared to the corner suites, but it had a window, a desk free of stains, and enough space to pin Liam's drawings on the wall. The first one he hung was Sophie's crayon sketch of the three of them beneath a brontosaurus. The second was Liam's Lego dinosaur blueprint. They were his compass reminders that everything he was building here had to be real human. Employees began stopping by his office at first timidly. A warehouse coordinator came to thank him for launching Project Anchor. A shy programmer brought coffee and confessed that for the first time he didn't dread coming to work. Ethan listened to each one, jotting notes, promising nothing he couldn't deliver. But the respect in their eyes told him change was taking root. One afternoon, Victoria invited Ethan to join her in addressing the entire company. The atrium filled with thousands of employees, some curious, some skeptical, all waiting. Victoria took the stage first. Her voice, usually steel, carried warmth. For years, she said, this company has thrived on results. But in our pursuit of profit, we forgot the people who make it possible. That changes today. She gestured toward Ethan. This is Ethan Cole. He started here as a janitor. Today he stands here as our Director of Culture and Purpose, not because of degrees, but because of integrity. He reminded me and all of us that kindness builds stronger than fear. The room rippled with applause, hesitant at first, then swelling. Ethan stepped forward, gripping the edge of the podium. His throat tightened, but he spoke from the only place he knew truth. I'm not here to give speeches, he began. I'm here because one day I saw a little girl sitting on the steps outside, hungry and scared. I shared my lunch, that's all. But it reminded me that the smallest acts can change everything. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to care. Sophie, sitting in the front row beside Liam, beamed proudly. Liam waved his inhaler, clutched loosely in his hand, his grin wide. The applause this time was thunderous. Ethan felt it roll through him not as glory, but as validation that maybe he could carry this responsibility after all. Later, as the crowd dispersed, Victoria found him backstage. You handled that well, she said. Ethan exhaled. I just told the truth. That's why it worked, she replied. Her hand brushed his arm briefly, almost absent-mindedly, before she pulled it back. Don't forget this company follows your example now. Don't let that scare you. It does, he admitted. She allowed herself the faintest smile. Good. That means you'll lead with care. But in the quiet of his office that evening, when the building had emptied and only the city's lights glowed through the window, Ethan found himself staring at Sophie's drawing again. He traced the crooked rainbow, the uneven letters spelling family. His chest tightened. Was he becoming more than an employee to them? To Victoria. The thought both warmed and terrified him. Outside, unseen, Marcus sat in a dark sedan across the street, watching the tower blaze with light. His hands clenched the steering wheel, knuckles white. His voice was a whisper, lost in the hum of traffic. You think you've won, Cole. But shadows last longer than light. Ethan had no idea the fight wasn't over. It was only pausing. Spring arrived with a softness the city hadn't felt in years. For Ethan, the days were no longer counted in mop shifts or overdue bills. They were measured in the way Liam's cough grew lighter and Sophie's laughter echoing down glass hallways in the subtle warmth spreading through the company that once lived on fear. On a Saturday, Victoria invited Ethan and Liam to the park. The air smelled of budding trees and grilled hot dogs from street vendors. Families sprawled on blankets. Kites swayed in the sky. Sophie ran ahead, tugging Liam toward the swings, their laughter trailing like music. Victoria set down a picnic basket, its contents far too elegant for paper plates, but she didn't care when Ethan unwrapped simple sandwiches he had brought along. They ate cross-legged on the grass, billionaire and janitor CEO and single dad boundaries dissolving into something gentler. "You realize," Victoria said quietly, handing him a bottle of water, "this all started with a sandwich." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "Strange, isn't it? Half a sandwich for her and somehow a second chance for me." "Not strange," she said, her voice softer now. "Necessary." They sat in companionable silence, watching the children chase each other. Liam held Sophie's crayon in the air like a sword, and Sophie squealed with laughter. Ethan's gaze lingered. "They look happy." "They are," Victoria replied. She turned to him, her eyes unguarded. "And so am I. You've reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago, that people aren't numbers to be managed. They're lives to be honored." Ethan swallowed hard. "I'm no hero. I'm just a dad trying to do right by his boy." Victoria smiled faintly. "Sometimes that's the greatest heroism of all." The sun dipped lower, spilling gold across the park. Sophie ran back with Liam, both of them carrying a new crayon drawing. They thrust it into Ethan's lap. 4 figures stood beneath a rainbow: Ethan, Liam, Sophie, and Victoria. Above them, scrawled in shaky letters, was one word: family. Ethan blinked back, the sting in his eyes. He looked at Victoria. She didn't look away. For once there were no walls, no boardrooms, just 2 parents and their children finding something like home. But as laughter rose around them, Ethan couldn't shake a quiet unease. In a city built on power, shadows always lurked at the edges. Somewhere out there, Marcus was waiting, his bitterness coiled like a storm. Still for now, Ethan let the moment breathe. He pressed the crayon drawing flat with his palm, smiled at the children, and whispered to Liam. Sometimes the smallest things turn into the biggest second chances, and in that fading light, hope felt real. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.